All right, so as always, we're going to do a recap of the previous Facebook Live Kids edition. From our first one was bear hardware, teeth and claws. Black bears are omnivores. They are opportunistic omnivores, which means they'll eat pretty much anything that's available to them, meat, vegetation. They have three main different kinds of teeth that are useful for those different kinds of foods that they eat, such as meat and plants. And they use their claws for climbing and digging up roots to find larvae and other food sources as well. Our second episode covers a bear's nose, and a bear's nose knows best. Bears can smell 7 times greater than a bloodhound. They use their sense of smell to find food, each other, and to detect danger. And a bear's sense of smell is usually what gets them into trouble with people. That's how they can smell out so well from campsites, those yummy, yummy barbecues at your house, and bird feed, all of those things. That's how they can smell it so well from so far away and come looking for those food sources. Our third episode was all about bear hair, and bears are mammals just like us, and all mammals have hair. Those initial guard hairs are used to provide protection, and that's what gives the bears their color, and their underfur is very important for insulation. Black bears can be any of up to 6 different color phases, so black bears aren't always black in color, and therefore color is not the best way to tell the difference between a black bear and a grizzly bear or brown bear. Our fourth episode was all about a bear's diet, and kind of like we covered in our first one, a bear's diet is very opportunistic. It changes greatly with the seasons and with what's available. And here at ABR, we do try to mimic this seasonal diet in a hands-off way. Scientists can also tell what a bear has been eating by looking at its scat or hair samples. And remember, a fed bear is a dead bear, so we always want to keep our human food sources nice and secure away from them. Our fifth episode was all about bear denning behavior. Bears are not true hibernators, but instead experience a winter sleep called torpor. So bears do not have to den up in the winter, but they do so more because of food availability. And there were 3 main den types that we looked at: tree cavities, excavated ground nests, or ground dens, and ground nests. All right, and last week we covered bears, humans, and habitat, and we did a little graphing and multiplication and division. And the creation of Great Smoky Mountain National Park and Cherokee National Forest really are the 2 greatest protections that were put in place in the state of Tennessee to protect wild black bears. Successful wildlife managers also manage people, and most of the time that's the harder part. And education is our greatest tool. Teaching people how to coexist with black bears is our greatest tool and best way to make an impact in bear conservation. All right, so our 7th episode is Appalachian Bear Rescue, caring for injured and orphaned bears. So this is going to be all about the care that we do here. It's going to tie in a lot of the information from our previous episodes, bear diet, bear hair, and how we can mimic all of those wild things here at ABR the best that we can to keep our bears as wild as possible. So what is ABR? A lot of you already know ABR is a nonprofit organization. We were started in 1990 after a devastating mass storage in 1989, which left a lot of starving and orphaned yearlings and bear cubs. And we received our first bear of the organization in 1996, and that was Cub 0. So ABR has a lot of partners. 2 of the main ones are the National Park Service and Tennessee's Wildlife Resources Agency. And then also other wildlife agencies, state wildlife agencies you can see listed out there at the bottom. Those are all places that we do receive bear cubs from, and we work with a great deal in order to get their bears released back into the wild. And here is ABR's mission statement. ABR cares for orphaned and injured black bear cubs for return to their natural wild habitat, increases public awareness about coexisting with black bears, and studies all aspects of returning cubs to the wild. So today's presentation, we're kind of going to hit on that main mission statement, and we're going to hit on each of the 3 parts and go into a little bit more detail. So for our first section here, we're going to hit on that first line of our mission statement, ABR cares for orphaned and injured black bear cubs for return to their natural wild habitat. And here is a great video. It's about 12 minutes long. As being the newest curator, a lot of this stuff is stuff that I'm still learning too, so I thought this video was a really great way to kind of wrap it all up and show you guys what we do here, how we do it, and how we maintain that hands-off barrier with all of our bear cubs. So please enjoy.
Nestled in the foothills of the Great Smoky Mountains, Appalachian Bear Rescue is the fruit of an idea planted in 1990 by caring people who wanted to give injured and orphaned bear cubs a second chance at life.
It's immeasurable what they bring back to this community, with the black bear being so much a part of this culture, so much a part of this heritage.
Bears are an iconic species. Everyone loves bears. Everyone cares about them. And to have a facility that can take an orphan cub and return that bear to the wild, it's an incredible service.
It's a public trust. Wildlife belongs to everyone. If those animals are hurt in some way, and we have the knowledge, the ability, and the resources to care for those, I think we have a responsibility to do what we can to try to take care of them.
Since the arrival and release of its first bear in 1996, this tiny nonprofit has had a big impact, working with the National Park Service and wildlife agencies from 8 different states to take in and care for over 250 young black bears. But the ultimate goal for every bear that comes here is for it to be returned to the wild, which is why few people ever see a bear once it arrives.
The primary rule of thumb for rehabbing that bear is hands off, no human contact, or as little human contact as possible.
As its first full-time curator, Daryl Radachak helped a budding idea take root.
Back then it used to be the Appalachian Bear Center. It was a lot smaller. We were just scraping to get by. It was a single wide trailer that was about 35 years old at the time. We didn't really have any of the financial backing to put money in a facility itself. All the money went into the bears and the care of the bears.
Since then, Appalachian Bear Rescue has blossomed into a one-of-a-kind facility. That single-wide trailer has been replaced by an office and numerous support buildings. The outdoor enclosure space has more than doubled, with the addition of 2 half-acre enclosures in 2015.
This one here, this is Cub 185. She came to us in May of 2012 with a pretty nasty laceration on top of her snout.
Whether a cub arrives with an injury, illness, or is malnourished and dehydrated, their first step on the road to recovery begins here at the nursery.
It's like a bear hospital. It's used for young nursing cubs in addition to injured and ill cubs. So this is their first stop, or level 1 care. We have scales for weighing the cubs. We have supplies for hydration. So we assume that all of our cubs are at least somewhat dehydrated. So when they come here, may administer IV fluids if it's severe, or oral electrolyte solution.
The very youngest cubs usually need to be bottle fed around the clock.
You're up feeding every 2 to 3 hours, and you're working multiple days in a row, and you can get really tired and exhausted.
Because they're so dependent on us for our care, you do run a risk of them bonding with their human caretaker. But we have several procedures in place to avoid that. At each step, we decrease human contact, and we do that much quicker than that would be in the wild with their mother.
The bears are moved outside as quickly as possible, either when they are healed sufficiently or for the nursing cubs when they can lap food out of a bowl. It's a step that can happen much faster now, thanks to the addition of these custom-designed cub houses.
We can move them outside a lot sooner. We don't have to worry about the weather. This building is, each block is insulated with the material. It'll have a covered roof that will allow natural light to come through. They'll have dens in here, and there's a large divider with the guillotine door where I could come in here and I could look. This will be a mirror top glass. I could look through to see the cubs and where they're at in this side. Go over here and clean up this side real quick, provide food, water, etc. Open that guillotine door when the cubs rush over, close it back and clean this side. So this will really reduce the human presence and they'll never see me.
What they will see are beautiful woodland scenes, thanks to a group of Townsend artists who volunteered their time to paint murals on the walls.
Things that the cub would see in their natural environment, it's much better than just a plain block wall. Makes for a nice environment for them.
Once the cubs reach the proper size and weight, they are moved to acclimation pens. Located within the wild enclosures, these pens help the cubs transition more smoothly into the open areas.
This right here is what we refer to as the jungle gym. We're actually standing within enclosure 1, acclimation pen 1. This is going to be used to temporarily house cubs that come in. They can hone additional important skills, obviously, such as climbing that they're going to need in the wild, develop strength and coordination and balance and everything. Whenever it's time for bears to actually leave and go to the wild enclosure or exit this area, I can pull on a counterweight system out here, which will then open the door opposite this one on that side, and the bears can just crawl right out and be within the actual wild enclosure space.
The wild enclosure is the last step in the rehabilitation process and the place where the cubs will spend the most time. Several safety features are in place to ensure the cubs can't get out, starting with a state-required electrical fence running around the perimeter.
If something were to happen to negatively impact the functioning of this fence, we have this as a backup, and bears can't get their claws in here. It's a really thick 4x8 sheets of plastic, heavy-duty plastic. As you can see, per our permit as well, anywhere we're housing Class 1 wildlife, the fence at the top portion has to turn inward toward the animal, and it is also lined with 2 strands of electricity.
Trees within 15 feet of the fence are wrapped to prevent the bears from climbing up and getting over the fence. But the rest of the trees, and anything else they can find, are fair game for climbing. These structures, made out of drainage culverts covered with rough slab planks, are placed on the ground
to replicate ground dens that bears would find in the wild. But we also just started something new, and so all of our wild enclosures have what we're calling just vertical dens, and they're made to replicate tree dens in the wild.
From a distance, cubs look cute and cuddly. But don't be fooled. Even small bears are powerful animals.
They're very destructive with the vegetation, especially these young like saplings. Bears want to grab them and break them off, and so the more you have, the more destruction you're going to have. They're really hard on enclosures.
An enclosure can hold 5 to 10 cubs, but because they cause so much damage to the natural vegetation, each enclosure must be left unused for a period of time.
We want to give it time to regenerate and regrow.
One of the most important parts of the enclosures are the visual barriers that keep bears hidden from humans. Observation towers allow caretakers to view the bears without being seen. Water is provided via an underground delivery system, and food is thrown over the fence, allowing the cubs to forage as they would in the wild.
We want them to remain wild. That's the most important aspect of what we do, and the hardest part of my job is every day just trying to think, how do we minimize contact?
Bears that become habituated, meaning they aren't afraid of people, will almost never survive in the wild. That's why state law mandates only a select few people are allowed near the wild enclosures.
I have permission to go down there, and I'm very hesitant to do so, because if there's ever a bear that's not releasable, I don't want to wonder if it's because I did something that I feel is selfishly for me. Seeing them here is great, and we're glad that we can take care of them, but there's no comparison to seeing them where they belong. So we stay away.
While most volunteers will never make it to the enclosures, there's plenty of other places they can help. Bear care requires resources and space, a laundry area for washing linens, an office equipped for curators to spend the night, equipment dedicated to preparing bears for release back into the wild, and perhaps most important, lots and lots of food storage.
We actually have 3 deep freezers for freezing fruits, muscadines, grapes, sliced apples. We can freeze and store acorns. We just go through those really fast. We also have shelves that we can fill with acorns and let them dry out. We have a dehumidifier in there so we can store them for the long term. We also have a cubby cooler. Building 2, which is just a giant refrigeration unit. If someone is willing to donate apples or pears, we'll all come together and go out and kind of harvest all of those and bring them back to our cooler. We obviously need a lot of fruit of those kinds.
Of course, all that work can't be done by the curators, which is why volunteers are so important.
Our volunteers work tirelessly. They stand at booths, they stand in front of the grocery store, they ask for donations, they teach in classes. They never see a bear, but they know what it means to give these animals a second chance.
It's just amazing that we have so many people that volunteer of their time and their money to ensure that this operation is a success. They do so much with really very little, and that's just because of their passion and because of their love of what they're doing and their love of what they believe in, and that's the Appalachian black bear.
Now that passion and love can be shared with even more people, thanks to the newly opened ABR Visitor and Education Center in Townsend.
Tourists coming in will have an opportunity to actually stop and get a little more history about what the black bear really is and what it really means for them to be here in this area and in the Smoky.
Because the rescue operation can't accept visitors, the new center gives people a place to come and learn more about ABR. It also helps ABR fulfill its mission to increase public awareness about coexisting with bears.
I think educating the public is probably the most important thing that we can do to save bears, even more important than what Coy and I do, because most of the time the cubs that we get in are because of some kind of human involvement.
That involvement can range from building homes in bear habitat, getting too close to bears in the wild, or leaving garbage like apple cores or watermelon rinds out where a bear can get to it. Something as simple as spitting chewing gum out on a trail can be enough to attract a bear and cause a potential conflict.
If you can really educate people and tell them how to secure their garbage, not to leave their pet food out overnight, and bird feeders in the spring and things of that nature, it goes a long ways, and it will help minimize the number of cubs that we have to bring into our facility.
The hope of everyone involved with ABR is a day when bears no longer need rescue. But with more humans encroaching on bear habitat, the reality is that conflicts between bears and humans will continue. And so will the need for Appalachian Bear Rescue.
We're very proud they're here, and they're worth their weight in gold as far as to wildlife biologists, state wildlife agencies, to be able to have a facility they can take them to keep them and then release them back out in the wild.
That ultimate goal, giving a bear the chance to live wild and free, can only be achieved by so many people working together. With your generosity and compassion for these animals in need, Appalachian Bear Rescue will continue building a legacy that will ensure the future of one of our most iconic species, the American black bear.
They were here a long time before we were. And I think it's very important that we protect that and ensure that they're here a long time while we're here and maybe even when we're gone.
I also want to do a huge shout out and thanks to our volunteers. As you saw on there, and kind of going off of how we are so hands off, our volunteers don't get to see the bears. They don't get to do quote unquote those cool hands on things, but they do work so effortlessly and tirelessly. And I have worked at a lot of other nonprofits and some specifically towards bears. And I will say ABR, I have never seen a group of such dedicated volunteers as you guys have. So thank you so much for that. We so appreciate that. And I think it's so wonderful and amazing that we all want to come together and help black bears. So we're going to hit on a couple of those main points from the video, go into a little bit more depth. How do we get our bears? And a lot of that is from you guys, right? It's from the public walking on trails. If you remember, Ferdinand was found on someone's farm. So finding cubs or orphaned bears on properties is oftentimes a lot of how we will get our bears at intake. However, we do have very specific permit guidelines that all of those cubs must be captured and handled by either a TWRA officer or national park ranger or an officer with another state or federal wildlife agency. So it won't ever be us curators responding directly to that orphaned bear cub. It'll always go toward or through some sort of wildlife agency first, which then they can bring it here to us at ABR, and we will then take it to the vet and care for it throughout its time here at ABR. So how do you know if a bear needs help? And sometimes it's pretty obvious if it was hit by a car or if it has a very obvious injury, that bear would need help. But a lot of the bears that we get here are orphaned or abandoned cubs. And so our rule of thumb is typically 24 to 48 hours. We tell those people to wait, to keep an eye on the cub. And if they haven't seen the sow return, that's generally our go-to time frame when we kind of guess that she will not return for those cubs. It's also a safe time frame to make sure that that cub is not going to get too hungry or too dehydrated during that time. And as a lot of you know, every single one of our intake bears goes to the University of Tennessee College of Veterinary Medicine first and foremost, just to get a checkup to see if there's any major internal injuries and if there's any specific special care that we at ABR need to know about while we care for them here at our facility. So here I made up a video for you guys of the kind of things we would do at an intake bear cub. I'm going to walk you through some of the ear tagging and those main things that we would do on any of our incoming cubs or yearlings through this video here on a stuffed animal, just to give you guys a kind of closer hands-on look at what we would do for our intake bears. Hello everybody, this is Curator Tori, and today you are going to help me work up a bear cub just like we would here at ABR when we get a new bear cub in. And then later we're going to work up the same bear cub as if it had grown into a yearling and was ready for release. And there's a couple different things we do during these workups. As a cub, when we get an intake bear, we don't do quite as much as we would for a bear that we're about to release, because those bears we want radio collared. We want to get more measurements on them and get a couple other things done. So let's pretend we just got this cub in. This is a little female, we're going to say, and it's a cub of the year, which means it's probably about 3 to 3.5 months old. Let's pretend we're at the UT vet, and this cub weighs 6 pounds. So for the sake of our exercise here, I'm going to fill out an actual data form. And you'll notice I'm wearing gloves, just like we would during a normal bear workup. We always wear gloves when we're feeding bears, when we're working with the bears, anything that we're going to be touching where that bear could smell us. If you remember from our sense of smell presentation, how well they can smell. So we really want to try to minimize that human contact with these bears. Even though we know they can smell us, any little barrier we can put between it is a good thing. So for incoming cubs, there's a couple main things we want to get. One of the big things is a paw print. So as you guys all know, I'm sure you have seen Ramsey's paw print, as well as a lot of other cubs throughout the years if you followed us for a while. And the way we do that is we actually just dab on some ink, which I'm not going to do to this stuffed bear, and just like that. So we always get paw prints of all of our cubs at intake and when we release them. So we have a paw print of when they first came in and when we release them. One of the other main things we want to make sure we do at intake is get a hair sample. So we usually just pluck right from either on the neck or down here on the rump. And the most important thing, always put it into an envelope and then we label that. The most important thing about collecting hair samples is we want to make sure we're getting the root of the hair, because that's where all the DNA is, right? So when we do research through ABR or research projects sponsored through ABR, or we have grad students like Coy was, that's going to be the part that's most important, is making sure we get the root. So you want to do a nice tug to get some of that hair out. We also always take pictures while we're working up a bear, especially at UT. When the vets are working, we make sure we get lots of pictures of what their plan of treatment is, any abnormalities, cuts, anything like that. We want to make sure we document it as much as we possibly can. We also, if they're old enough, we will ear tag cubs. So since this one is a cub of the year, like I said, probably 3.5, 4 months old, he's probably big enough to get ear tagged. So we are going to set up our ear tag here. So this is what an ear tag looks like before being put into the bear. And we actually just have this little contraption here that slides right in. And if any of you have your ears pierced or have gone to Claire's or somewhere in the mall like that, it works just like that little gun they use to push it through and pierce their ear. Similar, just the same on with bears. So for this, we usually try to aim in the very, very middle of the ear. We don't want it too far on either side of the edges because it could catch on things and snag. And a really just tight push. And it is all done. There you go. So now this bear is ear tagged. We got some hair samples, we got a paw print, we're taking a bunch of pictures. There are a lot of measurements that we also want to take, length of body. When we go over the yearling, we will do some of those actual measurements. I'll show the camera real close and you guys can tell me what you would write down on the data sheet. And another thing we want to do with our cubs is we want to pit tag them. So inserting a pit tag, we use this little contraption here. I don't have an actual pit tag to show you, but they're really teeny tiny. So imagine about the size of a grain of rice. And pit tag stands for passive integrative transponder, and it works a lot just like a microchip. So each one of them have different IDs. And if you have a pet, a dog or a cat who's been microchipped, it works the exact same way. So we actually just insert it right here behind the cub's scruff, just subcutaneously, so right underneath that skin, not into the muscle, not into anything else, just right under there. And that's just another form of ID that we use for our bears. So now this cub has been pit tagged, it's been ear tagged, we got its paw prints with taking a lot of pictures, we have its hair sample for DNA, and now we just wait for the vet to tell us what else it needs, if it's dehydrated, if it needs dewormer. And all of those things will go into what we call our treatment plan for this cub. So once this cub is all set at the vet, it has everything we need from it, like its ear tag, its pit tag, everything I mentioned before. And if it's healthy enough, we'll pack it up, bring it here to ABR, and that's when it'll either go into the nursery or right into the Hartley house or a recovery pen, depending on if it's sick, if it needs special treatment, and how old it is. So again, that process varies depending on how big and how old and how sick each individual cub is when they come to ABR. So we can get cubs that range as from small as these little guys, which are neonates. I'll play this quick video for you. Or we could get them much older. Here we have 2 cubs of the year, which would be about the same age as our 3 cubs that we have now here at the facility. And we could get them all the way up to a yearling, year and a half. So it really varies on our intake, what the mast is looking like that year, how old and how many bears we get of different ages. So with intake and outtake of all of our bears, it does require a lot of paperwork, and this is actually the exact form we use, our transfer of wildlife form. Because there are so many agencies involved in this process, we want to make sure we have very clear and concise records. So you can see here at intake, we do things like the date, the ABR bear number, the sex, age, weight, where we're getting that bear from, and the reason that the animal is being transferred here to ABR, whether it was injured, orphaned, abandoned, or any other circumstance. And then, like I mentioned in that video, here's what our plan of treatment looks like. It's a very laid out plan of treatment that almost all bears follow down to a T, but it just depends how old they are when they come, where they start. So for example, that first bullet point there, bears fed milk replacement formula by bottle or syringe. However, if they come to us and they're already able to lap out of a bowl, they'll skip that step and go right to lapping out of a bowl and straight from the nursery to either the Hartley house or recovery pen, whichever they need depending on their specific needs. And here's an aerial view of our actual facility. So you can see there in the upper right corner, that's our main office. Down there below that, there's a couple white buildings. One of those is our cub nursery. One of those is where we house all of our bear food. Another one is where we do all of our bear workups for discharge and release building. And then you can see there on the outskirts 4 main large outdoor enclosures. And so that first step for those bears would be our cub nursery, and here's some pictures from inside of our nursery. There's also a little sound clip. I'm gonna try and play that for you and skip ahead a little bit because the noises are towards the end, but you can, if you listen closely, you can hear some of those hummings and trills that our little bear cubs make that we love so much. And then once they're old enough to lap from a bowl and they don't need to be bottle fed anymore, they go into our Hartley house and then our acclimation pens, which are just smaller pens inside of our outdoor enclosures to get them used to being outside with the elements, and then they'll be released into our outdoor enclosures. So here is a video, a really thorough walkthrough of our Hartley house. A lot of you who have followed us for a while probably remember when this was built. And so I don't think this video has sound, but I'll try to kind of talk over it if that works out here, if I can figure out the technology, talk over it and tell you a little bit about what you're seeing. But either way, it's a really good view in of where our 3 cubs that we have now here at ABR are housed. They're all housed in this our Hartley house. So if you've been watching our Facebook Live clippets of those cubs, you're probably familiar with the enclosures inside, but it's kind of cool to see how all of our pulls and dividing doors work so that we can maintain that hands off. So right inside the door there, you saw a lot of batteries. That's where all of our electric fencing for the perimeter fence and enclosures 1 and 2 are hooked up to, so we can check and make sure our electric fencing is working correctly. And then as you walk through here, you can see that there are 3 main gates. So there are 3 separate pens, so we can keep up to 3 bears in here, or a few more if some of the bears can be housed together. We do have these little peepholes, which are really helpful for feeding. So in the video we saw earlier, Koi talked about using that dividing door to close, go into one of the rooms, put food and water, open it up, let the cubs go in there, close it again, and go clean the other room. And that's very similar exactly to what we do here in the Hartley house. And that little window can help us with that. But now we do also have our awesome camera system. So before I even go down there, I'm able to look at the cameras here in the office, see where those cubs are. If they're snoozing away in one of the rooms, it's pretty safe to bet that once I get down there, they'll also still be sleeping. And I'll know which room I can enter in safely, close the dividing door, and replenish food, water, and clean up some of their shavings. One of the best things about our Hartley house is all of the windows we have. It's a very open space with so much natural light coming in, and that's really helpful to the bears to make that transition to the acclimation pens, where they're going to be outside with all the elements, day, night, rain, and having this Hartley house have so many windows is the next best thing to being outside as they can be while they're recovering from being so weak, injured, or young. We have a lot of wonderful supply cabinets in there. As you can imagine right now, with 3 bear cubs in the Hartley house, we have stuffed animal bears, blankets, heat warmers, cub caves, all of that just kind of thrown all around in the Hartley house, so that we can switch all those things out if any of them are dirty or need to be switched out. And here are those dividing doors that I talked about. If we were to have larger bears in there, bears who are recovering, yearlings who we don't want moving around a ton yet, so we're keeping them inside, these dividing doors, it's very important to keep that little lock that you saw on there because they're so strong they could move it if they wanted to. So we always want to make sure that that's nice and securely closed and locked while we're working in the other room. That little dividing door also now has black plastic covering over it on either sides of it, so the bears on the other side of the door cannot see into the other enclosure while we're there cleaning and giving them food. And you can see that's just how we do it. So I'll go in, and if the cubs are in there, close it up and enter into one safely and open it back up, wait a little bit, and if they enter into the other one to get their food, I'm able to go clean the other one as well. There's also a fridge down there so we can store our formula for the cubs, as well as a water hookup to get fresh, clean water when we're changing out their water bowls. And then we also have the Red Roof Recovery Center, and this is more so for bears that might be injured and who we don't want to have such a large area to walk around and roam, and especially if we want to limit their climbing. So for example, the Louisiana female, when her leg was broken, this would have been a great recovery center for her. You can see on the walls the plastic we have up, and that's to prevent them from climbing. And this is kind of where we want to keep the bears who need to really remain low-key in order to heal due to some sort of injury. So this is also a video with no sound, but it's only about 30 seconds, so I'll play that for you. And again, if we did have bears in there, there would be nice wood shavings on the ground, some sort of mental stimulation enrichment in there for them. They, of course, wouldn't be bare and cement walls as you see here when they're all cleaned out. So then, depending on the bear, if it's either sick or too young, whenever they're old enough and big enough and strong enough to be released into our wild enclosures, that is our last step of the ABR process, and they remain in those wild enclosures until they are ready for release. And you guys are all very familiar with our wild enclosures. If you watch our Facebook Live videos, you get to see the ins and outs of those, and they really are the best place for them because it mimics the wild as best as we can. So here are some of those wild enclosure features, some of those man-made dens that we have, also their platforms. Me and Ashley spent some time last week redoing some of the platforms in enclosure 2 to make them more flat and safer for the bears to walk on. We do provide toys like those ropes or the hanging balls that you're so familiar with. And while they won't find these things in the wild, it's important for these bears while they're in captivity to continue to get mental stimulation in order to remain as wild as they possibly can. And we also have pools. And in the video, it talked again a little bit about that electric fencing for security, how all the trees within 15 feet of the sides of the enclosure are wrapped so to prevent the bears from climbing and escaping that way. And down in the bottom left, you can see Curator Tori throwing the food over the side. And if you remember from our bear diet video, all of the sides of our enclosures are blacked out with tarp so that the bears cannot see us. They can smell us and probably hear us, but we try to remain as quiet as possible so all they can hear is that bucket rustling around to, again, not correlate us with food. All right, and so this is after bears are in the wild enclosure, they've reached their last steps, they're all ready to be released into the wild, and this is kind of my mimicry video of our workups for bears that were ready to discharge. So the 4 bears that we released into the wild last week, this is exactly the sort of discharge workup that we did on all of them before they were released, and here's me walking you through with a stuffed animal bear to kind of give you another hands-on, better idea of the data collection we do and how we do that process.
All right, welcome back, guys. Here I have our bear cub, who's no longer a cub, that you guys helped me work up earlier on in the year. This cub is about to be ready for release, and it has been put under some immobilization drugs, and we have him up here on our table. And I'm going to walk you through kind of the discharge process here at ABR and all the things we do data-wise collection before we release our bears. So first and foremost, all of our bears, when they're under these immobilization drugs, are wearing a eye cover. So we're gonna do that right now. Now, how you act hands off around these immobilized bears is just as important as how you act hands-on with them. And what I mean by that is when we have an animal that's immobilized and under these sort of drugs, we want to treat them as carefully and as with much respect and awareness as we possibly can. So for example, covering the eyes is very important. We want to make sure things stay as calm and as relaxed of a setting as we possibly can for these animals, because this is going to be a stressful situation for them, right? Going under is going to be stressful. Waking up in a new place is going to be stressful. So we want to be very aware of how we are talking, how we're moving, how we're touching them the entire time that they are under these immobilization drugs. So eye cover is just one of the things we do to try and create the most calm setting that we can for them. Another thing that we do is make sure we're very aware with how we're touching them. We do have to take certain measurements. We do have to be checking respiration, but we want to make sure we're always being aware of how we're touching them, how we're turning them, because they are not in charge of their body at this moment. So we want to be very careful with how we're handling their bodies. We also always want to practice being very quiet. So we don't want to be talking loudly. We don't want to be yelling to each other across the room to bring the pit tag. We want to make sure we're all very calm, cool, collected, and talking in a very quiet, calm voice in order to create a situation that is as calming as possible for these animals that are currently under a lot of stress. It will be for sure when they wake up. So the eye mask, head cover is very, very important. And we will go on from there. So just like we did with our cub, we also take footprints of our adult bears upon release. So we will ink this back foot here. And there we go. So we have our footprints to put in their file. We also will do another hair sample. So like I said, we usually would either do it from behind the neck or back here on the rump's a really good spot to just pluck some out and make sure we get down in the roots to collect those roots if we ever need it for data research. And a little bit different than when we do with the cubs, because these adult yearlings or bears are under for a lot longer. We want to make sure we're checking temperature and respiration periodically, because the drugs can have an effect on those things. So we would do a rectal temp probably every 5 minutes, really depends. If they start to get too warm or if they start to get too cold, we check it more often just to make sure we're staying on top of it. And if they did get too hot, we would have ice packs available, and we put them under their armpits, under their groin. Those are really good hot spots to try and cool them off. And if they got too cold, we also have heat pads available where we put them same underneath, under their groin area, and we would maybe cover them up with some towels to try and keep them warm. Because the effects of drugs have different effects on different bears, differing how much they weigh, and just different bears. So we never really know how their temperature is going to be affected, so we want to monitor that periodically through the workup and react accordingly. All right, so next is, you remember we did pit tag this bear. And so we'll search for the pit tag, make sure that that hadn't migrated. If you guys do have dogs or cats who have been microchipped, you might have seen things online, or it's happened to you that your dog's microchip may have migrated throughout the body. That can sometimes happen. So we just want to make sure we can get a good reading on our microchip, or our pit tag, sorry, because if we can't, we want to insert another one. Okay, so you've heard it pick up that pit tag. Good, so we won't pit tag this bear again. Next we would ear tag. So you remember we ear tagged our cub. So let's see, here's our ear tag. What we would do is we'd actually cut out these initial ear tags that we did, and we would put in a new one because we want our ear tag to match our lip tattoo. So all of our bears here are going to leave with 3 main identifiers. They're going to leave with an ear tag number, a pit tag number, and a lip tattoo number. And the lip tattoo and the ear tag should match. Pit tag, it's a little bit harder with the amount of numbers that they require to get that to match up with it. But those are the 3 main identifying things that our bears will all leave with, and some will also leave with radio collars. So we would also radio collar. And I talked about lip tattooing. So lip tattooing, I'm not going to do it to the stuffed animal because it's really hard, but basically what we do with all of our bears is we want to get really good pictures of their dental. So we want to get pictures of the back teeth or the front teeth, so someone's up here holding it and we have someone taking really nice pictures, because the teeth can tell a lot about a bear. And when we do our lip tattoos, we want to do them in the upper lip, doesn't matter which side, and we'll have someone hold it. We will put some ink in there, and you'll go right in here with this and do that. And then you'll also cover up those couple pokes with the ink again to fill it in. And then they're tattooed. So we take a lot of measurements when we release our bear. We do tail length, chest circumference, neck circumference. We take a lot of paw measurements. So we'll just do a couple of those here now and get some practice with that. So here we're going to do paw width. And you just take it right across the paw. And what would you guys say that that is? 12 centimeters. Well, so we'll measure in centimeters, and I'll write that down. So we got 12 centimeters here. All right, what else do we want to do? Let's do total length. So total length is from the tip of a bear's nose to the tip of its tail. And it's kind of difficult to do on this bear because the way the nose is shaped. But we will try our best here. I want this to be as accurate as possible, so what we do is we would actually push the measuring tape against the body so that it goes exactly where that spine does, to the tip of its tail. So here's what we got. 82 for total length. And then let's do one more. We also do a forearm circumference. So that is just what it sounds like. We'd measure all the way around the forearm, pull the slack, make sure it was nice and tight against there. And that's about 19. So while we're doing bear workups, there's always someone doing something, right? So when we released our last 4 yearlings, you know, Ashley might have been recording data as well as keeping track of their respiration and temperature, while I was kind of scurrying around gathering all these measurements, yelling them out to her, and she was jotting them down. So it really is a teamwork thing. We got to make sure we're working as quickly, quietly, and efficiently as possible, so that we can then get this bear loaded up into the trap and on his way back home to the wild.
Alright, so I know that the angles weren't great on that video, but I hope it gave you guys a better look and understanding at what our workup process looks like to help prepare all of our bears for release into the wild. And this is a quick, just like 10-second clip of one of our bears here at ABR during a release workup. So you could see use of that eye cover there. If you thought he was breathing weird, they definitely are influenced by how well they breathe under the drugs. However, we have a whole chart of what's normal respiration, what's normal temperature, what's normal heart rate while under those drugs. And we always have one person dedicated to checking those, like I said, every 5 minutes or sometimes every 2 or 3, depending on how fast it's changing with each certain bear. So we do try to minimize the amount of people we have in the room during a workup, and it really varies from bear to bear how long those workups take. When we were working up those 4 yearlings that we released last week, me, Coy, Ashley, and the biologist kind of had it down into a rhythm. It took us maybe a little over 10 minutes to get a bear in and out, not counting the immobilization time, bringing the bear up to the workup room, but actually having the bear on the table hands-on. I would say a little over 10 minutes it took us, which is really good. We want to minimize that amount of time that we're hands-on and having that bear under those drugs. And we do, like I said, want to minimize the amount of people involved because it can kind of run into those too many cooks in the kitchen. So here's an example of our discharge transfer of wildlife form. So just like we do at intake, it's really important to have these discharge papers. We keep track of which new number ear tags they have, what lip tattoo number and which side on their lip, weight, age. Weight is oftentimes the most interesting part of it. We all want to guess and see how close we can guess to how much these bears weigh at release, and it's always such a good feeling to know how much weight they have gained while they're here at ABR, a good healthy weight. Who that bear is going back to, so whether it's going back to TWRA, Great Smoky Mountains, or another wildlife agency, another state wildlife agency. And then reason for discharge, when I got to help work up those bears, I got to fill this in, and for all of them, I wrote release to the wild. And I will tell you that is such a good feeling to be able to write that and know that these bears were going home. And here is an example of what that data sheet looks like when we're collecting those measurements. You can see on that bear illustration there where we're kind of taking those different measurements. if someone has taken a picture of the teeth. And if you remember from our bear hardware video, all of those great teeth pictures came from all these pictures we were able to get during bear workups. We can also write down if we notice any injuries, if there's any different samples that were collected, and this is just to kind of show you what our data sheet looks like. And here is a picture of me and the Louisiana biologist working up 299 from our last workups. All right, so obviously that first part of our mission statement is a huge portion of ABR here, of our work here at ABR. However, this second part of our mission statement increases public awareness about coexisting with black bears. You heard Janet in that first video say that this is probably the most important part of our mission, and I would agree with her, because if we're really able to stop that initial contact and problems with bears in the wild, that can lower the amount of bears that we need to take in here at ABR. And while we love our job, we would also love to be able to just have bears stay in the wild and not need our help. So a lot of our education we can do through our visitor and education center. This has looked a lot different this year, obviously, because of the virus, but I haven't ever been able to do any of these education things, but I know it's been a huge part of the organization since it started, is being able to do those outreach and programs, as well as in schools and public presentations. And then, of course, because of the virus, we were able to kind of make these virtual lesson plans as well that you're all enjoying today. Another part of that second part of our mission statement is keeping bears safe. So whether we have a group of volunteers helping to pick up trash, to minimize bears getting in trouble, installing bear-proof trash cans, putting up signs to make people aware of bears on trails and how to keep themselves and the bears safe. And we also partner with agencies. So the 5th International Human Bear Conflict Workshop in 2018 was actually hosted by ABR, and that was in Gatlinburg. And then our last part of the mission statement studies aspects of returning cubs to the wild. So this is where a lot of the research comes in that ABR is involved with. Curator Tori, as most of you are probably familiar with, got his master's thesis and did a lot of research on bears here at ABR. So he actually collared 42 of our bears and studied the survival and conflict behavior of those bears upon release into the wild. We've also helped track bear movements during the Gatlinburg fires, assisted in nuisance bear studies, provided GPS collars to a plethora of state agencies and national parks, and helped in immobilization studies and Southern Appalachian bear population studies. So these things are all new to me as the newest curator. If Coy was here, he'd be able to explain some of these research studies a little bit better to you, but these are all things that ABR has been a part of in research of wild bears. And through that, we've had 3 publications, and you can see those here. And then also research partnered with UT at the veterinary clinic. First black bear blood transfusion at UT was with one of our bears, and then using an endoscope to remove lodged trash, and you can see some of those photos here. So there's always research going on with ABR, with wild bears, or whether it's our bears when they get released into the wild, and that's always a huge part of our mission. And our job here at ABR is to not only work with the bears we have here in captivity to release into the wild, but also assist as best we can with wild research in order to learn how to better conserve the wild bear populations. So in 24 years, we've gone from 0, the first bear, and now we're on bear 303. So we've gone from 0 to 303 in 24 years here at Appalachian Bear Rescue. And a lot of that is so much thanks to you guys, our followers, our volunteers, whether you can donate or donate your time. It's been all thanks to you as well. So thank you so much for that. And that is all I have today on Appalachian Bear Rescue for you guys. I hope you enjoyed and got to learn a little bit more about the organization history and how we are able to take care of the bears here at our facility. Just a reminder, we do have one more Facebook Live Kids Edition, which is next Tuesday and that is bears of the world. So we're going to learn all about different bear species around the world and not just black bears here in Tennessee. So it'll be really interesting to compare similarities and differences between the bears we have here and maybe in your own backyard compared to across the globe. So I just want to thank you guys one more time. Thank you so much to all who donated, and thank you for tuning in. I will see you next week.